Intopia's International Day of People with Disability webinar on leadership and participation of persons with disabilities towards an inclusive, accessible and sustainable post-COVID-19 world. Featuring Intopia Connect Coordinator Charlii Parker, Intopia Director of Accessible Technologies Adem Cifcioglu, Social Media and Content Coordinator Tess Herbert, and Business Development Consultant Neil Jarvis.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are coming in from today, and thank you to everyone for joining us. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that I'm hosting this event from the lands of the Kaurna Nation. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we are meeting today, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging, and also extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people participating in this webinar. So welcome to the first webinar in the Intopia Insights series. We are kicking off the series on this day, Friday, December 3rd, in acknowledgement of International Day of People with Disability, and we'll be continuing into 2022 covering a number of hot accessibility topics. Today's webinar is going to be an informalish chat between myself and my fellow panel members, who I'll introduce to you shortly. If you do have any questions as we go, please feel free to pop them into the Q&A feature in Zoom, and we'll endeavour to answer those questions at the end. Please be mindful that we are sharing some very personal perspectives and experiences today. And while I'm an open book and I'm happy to answer all questions, if anyone on the panel isn't comfortable in answering or addressing something, that's absolutely their prerogative. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that captioning for this webinar is being provided by AI Media and interpreting is being provided by Echo Interpreting. For anybody who is wanting to have their questions interpreted by speech, you can do that using our interpreters. Please let us know. I'd like to let you all know as well that a recording for the webinar will be made available through the Intopia YouTube channel after the event. If tweeting about today, the hashtag is hashtag IDPWD. So without further ado, let's get started. I'd like to begin by introducing my fellow panel members. We have our resident librarian, Tess.
Hello.
We have across the ditch representing New Zealand, Neil.
Hi.
And finally, my former arch nemesis and now boss, Adem.
Hi.
Thanks all for being here, guys. Now, today's webinar topic and theme for International Day of People with Disability is leadership and participation of persons with disability towards an inclusive, accessible and sustainable post-COVID-19 world. We have a number of pre-prepared questions that we'll talk through, and then we'll take questions from the audience. As I said, those questions can be popped into the chat. If people would like to turn their microphones on, we can also interpret, our Auslan interpreters can also interpret on your behalf as well. So our first question is, can you tell us about your role with Intopia and your disability? And we'll start with Tess.
Well, Charlie, as you said, I'm an Alburyan, so I live in Albury and work remotely in my role as the social media and content coordinator for Intopia. I've been working here for about 6 months. I am totally blind. I have been since birth. My optic nerve just never developed. And I often like to say that my eyes are purely decorative, as they don't really do much, but you know, it's good to have them there. I also am someone with a generalized anxiety disorder, and I'll be talking about a little bit about both those disabilities and the impact they have on my work experience. Neil, do you want to go after me?
Thanks, Tess. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Neil Jarvis. I am based in Wellington, New Zealand, and I've been with Intopia for about 8 months now. So my role in Intopia is, I guess, twofold. I'm one of the business development team, and we work with clients and customers, new ones and existing ones, to find out what their requirements are, how we can support them to become more digitally accessible. And that might be looking at their websites, might be looking at their apps. And my role in that process is to help them to scope what their requirements are before we pass them on to the operational side of the company. I also work with organizations on looking at their strategy and their disability maturity, really, their accessibility maturity, I guess you'd call it. So we work with organizations to help them to find out where they're at with respect to accessibility, specifically with respect to digital accessibility, and help them to kind of go down that road from being perhaps beginning in that direction to moving on to becoming more and more mature as they go on. And we just help them with helping them to think about what their policies need to be, what their strategies need to be, and we help them with things like doing a gap analysis to determine what they're doing well, what they could do better. So that's what I do here. In terms of my disability, I'm totally blind. I always have been. It wasn't even a career choice. It was something I just always had. And I also have a chronic illness called Crohn's disease. I don't know that it strictly counts as a disability, but it does have disabling impacts on life from time to time. So it's worth putting that in the mix as well. So that's who I am, it's what I do, and I will perhaps ask Adem to say some words about his experiences.
Thanks, Neil. So I'm Adem Cifcioglu, one of the co-founders and also the Director of Accessible Technologies at Intopia. What does that mean I do? Well, I do a lot of different things from, the sort of business side of things in the back end of Intopia, but also the anything from consultancy to training to all sort of things under the sun accessibility related. In terms of my disability, I've got a mild form of cerebral palsy, which for me means that outside of the house 9 times out of 10 I'm using a wheelchair. But other than that, as you'll probably find out throughout this call, I don't think the disability affects me too much in my day-to-day life. In fact, this is normal for me because I've had it since birth. So it kind of is what it is, and I do things the way I do them, and everybody else does things differently to me, so that's their problem. That's me, and I'm going to throw over to Charlie.
So I'm Charlii Parker. I am ADHD. I generally say I have ADHD, but I've been schooled by the community that I am ADHD. It's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So if I stop talking while I'm meant to talk during this webinar, that's generally why, because my brain's wandered off to do something else. I don't consider ADHD as a disability. But being neurodivergent does affect the way that I interact with the world. The world was not set up to suit the way my brain works. So my role at Intopia is as a digital accessibility consultant. I also do training and I coordinate Intopia Connect, which is where Intopia connects businesses with people with disability for user testing and user studies. So I coordinate the panel for that, which is a big part of what I do, and it's my favorite part of what I do. So we'll go to our next question. Does working in your role with a disability come with any challenges? And I will throw to Neil for this one.
Thanks, Charlie. Not specifically in this role, although I guess there are certainly challenges that would affect pretty much any role that I would be in. I give you examples. For instance, when we are in a Zoom meeting or a Teams meeting, I cannot benefit from screen sharing, and screen sharing is obviously a major part of meetings like that. I can screen share, so you can have my stuff, but I can't share your stuff. It's not possible for that to happen. So I am relying on the screen sharer to be a good describer of what they're doing. But then that's also the case in pretty much any event that I'm attending or any meeting that I'm attending where there is any kind of visual presentation going on. So it's just another example of that. I guess one area in this role which can be an issue for me is obviously when we're working with clients, that can be on a whole range of issues that they're interested in, and sometimes they'll be asking us to advise them on the visual appearance or the visual design of their websites or their mobile apps or whatever it happens to be. Now, that is something which I will, at that point, pass on to one of my colleagues. And in Intopia, we're well set up to cater for that. So whilst I might have the primary relationship with the client when it comes to doing a specific visual check on something, I'm clearly not going to do that. But that is something which it doesn't affect me negatively. It's just a way of working in an alternative way, I guess. But it's always going to be those visual things, I suppose. And the only other area which is worth touching on is in relation to the Crohn's disease. One of the issues around that is that you can get very sick very quickly, and sometimes that can obviously can have a detrimental effect on your ability to work on a given day. That's just part of life. I don't regard that as anything that affects me anymore in this role than it does in life generally, and pretty much most of the time I'm okay there. So yeah, I would say mostly the visuals. And perhaps we could ask Tess what her experience is.
Well, thanks, Neil. Well, because my job is very much so creating content for our social channels and creating email content, writing articles, that sort of thing. So, I mean, a lot of that isn't so much affected by my blindness because I have a good screen reader and a good computer setup. So that's quite helpful. There are, of course, challenges because sometimes when you have to send out a big amount of emails or a newsletter, you have to do it via a particular platform, and that might not be particularly accessible. So I might have to delegate one of my colleagues to help me with that. So if there's a piece of software or system that I can't use that because of my blindness, that can be challenging. But for the most part, my blindness in terms of what I do isn't a big problem. I think my anxiety disorder, I've always been reticent to call it a disability, but I would say that it is actually more debilitating than my blindness when it comes to my work. I mean, with everything else as well. The reason for that is that, the blindness doesn't help, but if something goes wrong or I can't use the system or, I make a mistake or it's just a bad anxiety day, I do find it difficult to get out of the anxiety circle. I've called my anxiety Gladys. I've given it a name, just to simplify. So sometimes if I can't use a particular system because of my blindness or something goes wrong or I make a mistake, I can get into a real spiral, which can make it very difficult to keep functioning and to keep working. And of course that doesn't really help. And yeah, I mean the blindness, it sometimes is a hindrance in so much as if Gladys is already telling me that I'm not good at, say, a job, or back in the day when I was doing uni, if Gladys is saying I'm not good at something, and then on top of that I can't use the system because of my blindness, that can make it 10 times worse, if that makes sense. So they do interrelate, and I would say they both come with challenges, the anxiety more so, but it's all about working through those challenges. And I've learned to kind of, in my previous and current roles, to try and moderate that as much as I can, and plan ahead and think ahead so that the effect of both the disabilities doesn't affect me as much as it might have. I think, Adam, I'll pass to you.
Thanks, Tess. So Charlie, just going back to the question, it was how does my disability affect me in my role?
Yes. Does working in your role with a disability come with any challenges? And as the director, you've probably mitigated all of those, but see if there's any left.
Well, to be honest, I don't think it does. I mean, not for me personally, anyway. I've always been from a sort of personality perspective, I never really felt like I've had a disability. Yes, as I was saying in my opening, I do things a bit different, some things a bit differently to everybody else, but that's just how I've always done them because I've had my disability since birth. So everyone else is different, and that's them, not me, in the sense of the way we do sort of certain things. So in terms of challenges with employment and those sort of things more generally, I think my biggest challenge at times is getting into buildings. So it's more of a physical challenge in the sense of, is there wheelchair access to the building, etc. But in terms of performing the functions of my role, I'd say no, my disability doesn't really affect any of that. Over to Charlie.
Excellent. And to me, so same question, does working in my role with a disability come with any challenges? A little bit like what Tess and Neil have said about their anxiety and the Crohn's disease. I don't see ADHD as a disability as such, but it does absolutely affect me because our world and our general office work is set up for 9 to 5, and my brain does not always want to work 9 to 5. My brain's preferred working hours are 7 till 3, and that's PM to AM. So it doesn't necessarily fit with the world in this hemisphere. So for me, a lot of the time is actually being able to engage my brain to work when it needs to, and stay on task and stay on topic, and complete tasks. So working in a very task-orientated industry where a lot of people rely on you and there's projects that need to get finished, that is something that I do struggle with at times. I'm very lucky that I have a very supportive community around me at Intopia, but it is hard at times for me to stay on task when my brain just wants to wander off and do other things. Our next question is, what has the impact of COVID-19 been on your day-to-day working life? Maybe we'll start with you this time, Neil. I think I started with you last time, but we'll go again with you.
Fewer face-to-face meetings. That's probably been the major effect, really. Intopia as a company has always been a company that does its work remotely, and with or without COVID, I think Intopia would have been filled with people who worked from either their home or from a joint workplace type place. For me personally, having only been with Intopia since April, which was well into the pandemic, I noticed no difference whatsoever. And I, in fact, was pretty much working from home for the last few years anyway, even before the pandemic started. So I think last week I had a face-to-face meeting, which I reckon was possibly the first one I'd had in months and months and months, and that was a bit exciting. But that was the major difference I've noticed, I think, as far as the new normal, as we're told it's going to be called, is concerned. So I will going to pass back to you, Charlie, so that you can have a bit of a break between questions.
Sure. So for me, a bit like Neil, I was working from home before it was cool. I started working from home back in probably 2018, 2019, definitely. And for me, it actually is, it poses some benefits and some difficulties. So, having ADHD and getting going is a really difficulty in the morning. So having a commute to work was very hard, getting to work on time, having to be dressed in real clothes. although having to be dressed in real clothes, I put on my work persona and I was able to focus a lot more. When I'm at home, I can get up in the morning and wander down to my desk, but without that break between home and work, it can get a little bit difficult. All of my fun stuff's here, and part of having ADHD is that you chase the dopamine, you chase the fun stuff. So it's very hard to, if you're in the middle of doing something and you're having a really hard day with it, to not go, oh, I'm just going to go and do something fun for a few minutes. And part of having ADHD as well is time blindness. So I have very little perception of time. Time is definitely a man-made construct, and I was not invited to the meetings on those ones. So the passage of time has no meaning to me. So I might go and think, I'm going to take a break from my computer. I'm going to go and sit down and work on one of my hobbies for 10 minutes just to get a bit of a break. 2 hours later, I'm still sitting there and not back at where I should be. Fortunately, working from home, as long as nothing needs to, I don't need to be at a meeting or in front of someone, I can come back and do it in the evening when my brain is like, yeah, we're ready to work now. The rest of the world shut down. So having distractions around is really difficult. I can still have up to a 45-minute commute to work, even though my office is literally downstairs from my bedroom and the rest of my living area. So there's lots of distractions. I can wander downstairs. I'll get downstairs and think, oh, while I'm down here, I should put on a load of washing. Oh, there's more washing upstairs. I'll go back upstairs. So a lot of toing and froing. Whereas if you're in an office at work, you're in an office at work, and there's very little that can be distracted or that can distract you. It's also quite isolating working from home. We're very lucky in that Intopia has there's a lot of catch-ups over Slack. We have stand-ups 3 times a week, so we catch up with other people. But something that Tess and I have started is Breakfast Club, which is a Monday morning, first thing in the morning catch-up just before we start work, because we have a 10 a.m. meeting on a Monday, and that meeting goes for an hour. And I think Tess and I used to spend about the first 25 minutes discussing our weekend because we don't have that normal come into the office on a Monday, see everybody while you're making your coffee as you go to your desk and catch up. It's the first time we've seen each other and spoken to each other. So we would go into big conversations and lose quite a bit of time in our meetings. So we've started a breakfast club, which, generally 3, 4, 5 people will join, and it's just a morning catch up on a Monday, like we would in a normal office. And that's a really great way to start the week. So I found that has helped with the isolation as well. So, and Tess, have we thrown to you? No.
Well, I found working from home, because like Charlie and Neil, I was also working from home before the days when it was cool. I think I used to do some freelance work that required me to leave home, and I think one internship, but I'd already done quite a bit of work from home, and I was only 3 weeks into a new job last year, my first ever full-time job, and of course the pandemic hit, so I had to work from home. I actually think it's been beneficial in a number of ways. I mean, it is difficult because from the perspective of my blindness, if I'm finding something inaccessible, I can't just lean over to my colleague and say, oh, what's this? Can you help me with this? Or I can't read this, or whatever it is. But by the same token, I love that, we have our Slack channel, which is fairly quick communication. So that kind of remedies that. Also, not having to worry about navigating to work, and, just being able to have everything from home and everything familiar. Certainly, I think, I was navigating my way around my workplace reasonably well before the pandemic, but, then I moved on 9 months later, and then again to Intopia. And so, it's wonderful not having to learn a new workplace. I also think, from the perspective of my anxiety, if it's wonderful, working from home from my perspective is wonderful, because if I'm having a very, very bad Gladys day, which happens rarely, but, if I have a panic attack, which can sometimes happen, I'm glad not to have to do that in a work environment. Instead, I can actually be doing it in the privacy of my own home, and then I can just take a little bit of time to do my version of mental health first aid, which is really some breathing exercises, a cup of herbal tea, and some relaxing music in the garden. But it's something. I can do something, and I can do it in privacy. So if I am having a really bad anxiety day, I can just take some time, and no one necessarily needs to know. I can just do it. And like Charlie said, the flexibility of working from home and the flexibility of working for Intopia is wonderful, because if I am having a bad anxiety day and I just get to a point in the afternoon where I'm really struggling to function and I just need to take some time, I can come back to it a little while later, which I love. So working from home, it's not always perfect, because you don't have that direct person-to-person contact in the office. But I have to say, as someone who's blind and has anxiety, that I love it. I cannot recommend it more highly. Over to you, Adam.
I have to say, working from home has probably been the worst part of COVID for me. I kind of hate it. I've always hated working from home. I spent 10 years in a corporate context, in a corporate office, before co-founding Intopia. So I was very, very used to work gets done in an office. And if you do work at home, that's, your choice, because you've got a couple of things to finish off. And otherwise, work is left at work. What COVID has done has meant, well, work and home are the same place, are the same thing. The boundaries get blurred a fair bit, because I like working anyway, and the fact that I was at home and was able to do things kind of however I wanted, whenever I wanted, meant that the balance that I'd kind of trained myself to have, where predominantly work was at work and home was, like Charlie said, where the fun stuff was, and where you were having fun, that kind of got lost a little bit. So I think that's probably the biggest impact that it's had for me work-wise, because as soon as offices opened back up and we were allowed back into our co-working space here in Melbourne, that's what I did, and that's where I am today. So yeah, I kind of get out of the house now as much as I can from a work perspective to try and get some of the balance back and make sure, work is work and home is home again.
Yeah, I've definitely been the same. I used to say that I work from home. Now I live at work, because it's always there, but it's not a bad always there at the moment. So that's a good thing. So in terms of accessibility, how does your current workplace compare with previous workplaces? Tess?
Well, I think this working here, where digital accessibility is just at the forefront of everything that we do, is from someone who's blind and uses a screen reader, is quite wonderful. I mean, it's not to say that there aren't occasional issues with software and systems, but for the main part, everything is fairly accessible. And if something's not accessible, we just find a way around it, and it's accepted. Which is helpful from the point of view of me being blind, and I can just say, look, I can't use this. I've tried, I can't use it. And there's just the automatic acceptance. Oh, it's not a me thing, it's a that piece of software thing. And I guess that's always been the case with the other organisations I've worked with. It just possibly hasn't been there quite as much, or maybe I just haven't felt the confidence. So having digital accessibility at the forefront and working with people who are committed to digital accessibility makes it quite easy to say, oh, this isn't working. And a lot of the time we can find accessible ways around it. It's also good from an anxiety point of view, in that I don't have to, when things used to be accessible and I couldn't use them, I used to think, oh, maybe the problem's me. And, Gladys used to get very, very loud. Whereas that doesn't happen so much, because there's people that, people that know about accessibility and how things sometimes just don't work. And so we just figure it out, and there's always a way around it. So yeah, and I felt very supported in that way as well. So I think in terms of accessibility in comparison to previous workplaces, this is definitely really, really great. Adam?
I'm probably not best placed to answer this
Oh, yeah.
this question, so I might throw over to Charlie.
For me, I think for me, the recognition of my ADHD previously, and I've been diagnosed now 3 times with ADHD, so I still have it, and I really, really, really have it. But previous organisations, and even where it was similar work around accessibility, so there was knowledge around neurodivergence and cognitive disability and things like that. Me saying that I had it wasn't always taken seriously, whereas here, one of the questions that I got asked in my pre-interview was, what can we do to support you? And the team, everybody's aware. I feel comfortable here talking about my ADHD. I don't make it as a joke as I used to. I used to sort of go, oh yeah, it's my ADHD. It actually is my ADHD, and I can seriously talk about it here. And things like email responses. If I get a lot of email, if I put out a meeting to 20 people and everyone responds and it all hits my inbox, that becomes really overwhelming and distracting because my email goes off. So I've asked a few people, so when you respond to a meeting, just hit no response, and then it won't come to my inbox. I'll know whether you're there or not when I get to the meeting, or I can check if you've accepted myself. But all of those inbox messages, and that can be when I'm organising Intopia Connect user session. So I'll have all of the clients that are going to be watching. I'll have the participant who's going to be participating, and any observers that we've got from our side as well. So there can be sort of up to 10 people responding to emails or invites saying whether they're coming or not. And so then I get, and that's per session. And, sometimes we run 5 sessions a week. So a lot of things like that. So where I get points of overwhelm, I'm comfortable enough in saying, can we maybe do things this way? And everybody takes that on board, which is really, really good. How about you, Neil?
Yeah, well, very much in line with what you and Tess have said. By the way, I was really looking forward to Adam's response to this question. Big disappointment there. But in terms of what Charlie and Tess have said, I pretty much would go along with that, I think. Intopia is about accessibility. It's what we do. So you'd kind of expect us to do it well, and I think that we do. As a company, we do. I've had good and bad experiences over the years in many organizations I've worked in. I've had excellent experiences around accessibility and people realizing that if they're going to use lots of pretty pictures, they're going to have to describe them to me or whatever it happens to be. I've worked in organizations where that hasn't so much been the case, and it's always been a bit of an uphill battle, but at the time I felt it was worth it. Intopia certainly is a case where I think we are lucky that everyone in the company gets accessibility, and the company as an entity gets accessibility. So I don't feel the need to have to try in the same way as sometimes you do. So that's always good. All that said, Intopia doesn't exist in a bubble of its own. It does work in the world. And of course, that means that from time to time, we're going to come across examples of inaccessibility that we just have to work with. And as people working in the company, interacting with people in other organizations, sometimes we're going to come across accessibility challenges. And I think when that happens, that's the real test. And I feel that Intopia provides very good support to ensure that is not a disruptive experience for me. And I'm speaking in all those cases specifically as my experience of a blind person. With respect to the Crohn's situation, there is no real effect other than the fact that sometimes I have to have interesting working hours just to cope with the effects and the exhaustion that sometimes happens. But Intopia is very good at saying to people, we don't expect you to work outside your working hours, but we don't hold you to 9 to 5 requirements either. So as long as we do the work, that's what Intopia cares about, and does the hours, and I feel very supported to do that. So yeah, I still want to hear what Adam was going to say, but anyway, Back to you, Charlie.
We'll give Adam one more opportunity. Anything you wanted to add? You plead the fifth.
Yeah, I'm going to plead the fifth. I mean, yeah.
That's fine. And to everybody watching, we are very, very pro Intopia here and in this conversation, but a lot of that comes from previous experience. And when we were preparing for this webinar, we thought about places that we were previously and where we are now. And we do have a model here that works really well for pretty much everybody in the team. So we thought it would be a really nice way to showcase what we're doing, changes that have been made here, and things that are accepted that maybe can be taken over into other organisations as well, seeing what works here and how things can be made more accessible. So on that, compared to previous experiences, do you feel that you have the opportunity to participate in team meetings and contribute to the culture at your workplace? And I'll start with this one because I'm already talking. So for me, it's not always been my disability, or it's not always been my ADHD. Quite often for me, being female has meant that I haven't necessarily had a voice in an organisation. And being a female with ADHD, I can come across as a little ditzy sometimes, as a little bit flaky. So quite often my opinions weren't always taken on board, especially working in a very male dominant area. Whereas here, my voice is heard, my opinions do matter and they are taken on board. They aren't always necessarily agreed with, and I think that's great. We have a really healthy debate system over here, or really healthy conversations where we can all put in our points of view, and sometimes we'll have to concede, like Bridget Jones is in fact a Christmas movie, Tess. But it means that I can actually contribute and feel that I can contribute and feel valued, and I think that's really, really important in the workplace. I'm going to throw to Neil so that Tess can't rebut my statement.
That's so skillfully done. I would really just echo what you've just said, though, Charlie. I think I'm not getting involved in the Bridget Jones discussion because I've never heard of Bridget Jones. But I would certainly agree with everything else that you said, that I think that we are encouraged to speak up. We are encouraged to contribute. I do feel that my thoughts and views are respected, and like you say, not always agreed with, and that's very healthy. Obviously not. You don't want it to be too healthy. I mean, come on. But no, it is. It's a good thing, and there's people, I think, do feel confident to express their point of view and to make their contribution. I guess the question was, how does that compare to other situations that I've been in? And the answer to that is, I've always been quite lucky, I think. I've been in leadership roles in quite a few organizations that I've worked in, leadership or management roles, some in a couple of cases quite senior leadership roles. And that kind of gives you a little bit of an advantage in that respect, that you get to say and do what you want to in a way that perhaps you don't have if you're not in that role. So I think certainly that has helped. And in those situations where I haven't been in a management or leadership role, I am quite mouthy. So, I'm quite happy to put my oar in and see what happens and what have you. But here at Intopia, I'm not a manager, I'm not in a leadership team, but I do feel that if I've got something to say, it will be heard. And I'm now going to pass to Tess because I want to hear what she has to say.
Thanks, Neil. Well, I think, I would agree with what the others have said. I think in previous experiences, I always felt like I could have a voice, but I didn't feel as confident to be as much participating in things as I do here. Often I would, it depended what kind of meeting it was, but often in my most recent, position, often in one of my most recent positions, I would, not talk much, and there were other positions where I would, like, it kind of varied, but I didn't feel like I could participate as much in meetings as I do here. Part of that has to do with confidence. Part of that also is not feeling. I mean, often when people would sort of screen share or and I wouldn't necessarily be able to follow along with what was happening. I think one of the challenges of online meetings is not only screen share but also there's a lot of conversation that happens in the chat, the Zoom chat, and sometimes I can't always follow along with that because my screen reader starts reading it out in the middle of someone else saying something, and then I have to stop it, and then I try and access whatever it was that was said, and I can't. I'm not always successful, so it's sometimes hard to keep up. But I always feel like I have a voice here, and I always feel like I am valued and what I have to say is valued. And I'm not someone in any kind of leadership position. I'm very new. I'm still in a fairly junior area of work, but I feel comfortable here. And I was saying to Charlie earlier that in my other workplaces, I think maybe one of my colleagues might have known about my anxiety in one of the workplaces, but most had no idea. And in the same way that I'm out to all of my colleagues, also everyone, well, I think most people at this stage, certainly after this week, know that I have anxiety, and I'm comfortable to say that I have anxiety and to talk about it. And I've got a couple of colleagues who, if Gladys is giving me a very bad day, I can chat to them and they'll get it. And that is something that's so new to me, that I can have that voice and be myself. Also all the meetings that we have and Breakfast Club, it just gives so many opportunities to be part of things and get to know everyone. So that was a very long answer. I'm very sorry. Now, who hasn't answered this one?
So Adam still hasn't answered.
I think that was me.
To go
I will. Yeah, I'll answer this one, or I'll answer this one in part because I think it forms part of why we do some of what we do at Intopia the way we do it. And I think in my career I've been really fortunate to have really good leadership all the way along. Before co-founding Intopia, I was working at one of the major financial institutions in Australia. I'm not going to name which one, but I was lucky enough to, at every level, coming into that organisation pretty much fresh out of uni. I mean, I had one job before that, but pretty much fresh. I had really good leadership all the way along, who not only did they want you to have a voice and voice your opinion, but they listened and took it on board and actually, accepted suggestions and took suggestions and went looking for suggestions for ways to improve things. So I think Tess, Neil, and Charlie, you all said, being yourself, and I think for me that's the critical, I think, similarity between what we're doing here at Intopia and what I've been lucky enough to experience in my career to date is, in all of my roles, I could always be myself. Sure, I had a fairly obvious visible disability in that I was a guy in a wheelchair, but to my managers, to my colleagues, to friends, to the people that I was working with, that didn't matter. It wasn't a factor. The only time it was when we were organising events, and it goes back to, could I get into the building, right? But outside of that, I think the fact that I could go to work and be myself in all scenarios is it's a great thing, and it's one of those things that we really want to make sure that anybody that works at Intopia is able to do.
Fantastic. And Kay in the chat has mentioned Anna and the Apocalypse as a better Christmas movie, and there's a link, so anyone who wants to go and check that out, I'm definitely going to look at it later because that sounds
absolutely
amazing. So Neil, you mentioned before you have had leadership opportunities and leadership roles and senior leadership roles. Has your disability had any impact on your access to leadership opportunities, both currently or previously?
I guess, I suspect that my disability has given me a perspective which others don't have, and sometimes in some organisations that is sought out. So in that respect, it's probably been a contributory factor to my career development. It certainly hasn't been the contributing factor, but I would say it's probably been one of them. We all bring something to the table, don't we? And usually we bring several things to the table, and that's probably one of the things that I have brought, is my experience as a result of my disability and my perspective. But you also have to see beyond that if you're going to be in a leadership role, and hopefully I have done that in the past, and will always continue to do that. But yeah, I think it's contributed, but I don't think it's been the defining factor. Adem.
Yep. Charlie, can I just get you to repeat the question for me?
The question was, has your disability had any impact on your access to leadership opportunities in both your current or previous roles?
So in my current role, obviously not, because I was a co-founder of the company. So in a leadership position here. In previous roles, no, it hasn't, in terms of it's never been, or at least from my experience, in at least in my mind, there's never been a limiting factor. In terms of the leadership role I was in previous to Intopia, it was leading an accessibility team in a corporate. So, potentially it had a benefit in that regard, in that I was a person with a disability leading an accessibility team and had an understanding of the an intimate understanding of accessibility and the need and the importance, and was able to talk to people in terms of my leadership and my sort of managers about real world impacts and sort of make it more real for them, I guess. So in that regard, it was probably beneficial, because the guy in the wheelchair talking about accessibility at a meeting probably does have a bit more of an impact than not, if that makes sense.
You've got the street cred.
Well, I don't know if I've got the street cred, but I've got something.
That's excellent. So for myself, I've had some minor leadership roles, or middle leadership roles in previous jobs, and sometimes my ADHD definitely did hold me back, because I wasn't always seen as having the organizational skills or the skill set. One thing about having ADHD, though, is I am excellent in a crisis, because my whole life is a crisis. Everything is last minute and everything is a crisis. So if things go wrong, I am your girl. Call on me, I will get things sorted, and we'll all get we'll all get off the ship safely. So I was fortunate enough a couple of times to have managers who saw that in me, and saw that, when the rubber really hit the road, that I could take control and take leadership of things. So I was very fortunate in some previous roles, and also in this role. I sort of joined at a time where an opportunity came up to look after Intopia Connect, and it's not really a leadership role. We definitely work as a team, but it is kind of my baby, and it's something that I've been allowed to run with, which is I'm not sure you should run with babies, but this is mine and I do it. What advice would you give to other people with a disability who are hoping to advance their chosen careers? I'm going to go with you, Adem, as a director.
That's an interesting question, that one, and I haven't pre-prepared anything, so I'm kind of thinking on my wheels here. But I think the biggest advice I've gotten, and it's going to be tough in some situations, but be yourself, because at the end of the day, if you can't be yourself in the role that you're you're going for or the role that you're working in, then it's probably not the right role for you. I genuinely believe that there are the right roles for the right people, and you should be able to feel, yourself. You shouldn't have to put up a front or a mask or whatever it is they call it. I'm not with the terminology, but you shouldn't have to do that to go to work each day. We spend a whole lot of time of our lives at work, and so if we're not comfortable and we're not being ourselves, then it makes it really, really hard. So I guess my advice is find a role where you can be yourself, and you've probably found the right role. I don't know if that made any sense at all, but
it's actually really funny because when I used to work for DHS, there was a bit of a running joke that I had many personalities. People could tell, and that's part of being ADHD. You kind of wake up and you're very mood driven, and people could tell what kind of day they would have based on what I was wearing and how I was dressed and how my hair was done. And they named those people. So one of my colleagues absolutely loved when I came in as the persona that they called Emma, because Emma was very businesslike and we got stuff done as Emma. Emma was very, very on her game. There was also Penny, and Penny used to like drawing flowers and circles on pieces of paper and could barely get a sentence and definitely wasn't paying any attention. And she would show up sometime. So it's really funny that you talk about being yourself. And I used to turn up as all of myself. And at the end, when I left that job, they gave me one of my colleagues made a board that said the role of Charlie will be played today by, and had a list of names so that I could take it to my next workplace and people knew who they were going to get on the day. How about you, Neil?
Well, I guess I would just echo a lot of what Adam was saying about being yourself. I think that is first, second, and third, really, in the advice I would give. But go for it. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't do it. The world's full of people who will try and beat you down. Oh, that's Echo telling me that she doesn't know that one. Strange. So don't let anyone tell you that you can't. The world's definitely full of people who think that they know better than you do. Definitely, if it helps you, seek advice and support from someone who's gone before you, maybe a mentor or someone like that. That works for some people. Doesn't work for everyone, but it works for some. But yeah, above all, be yourself, because authenticity always trumps artifice. People will find out if you're not being yourself, and then they won't trust you. So yeah, that's my advice. Tess.
I would agree. I would agree with you, Neil, and with you, Charlie. I also think, part of that is being open about what your limits are and what you really struggle with. So I think the thing is that if there's something that you really struggle with, the most important thing is not to just try and deal with it, and that just could be a software that you're you could be really bad with using PowerPoint, or you might really struggle with a particular platform, or there can be whatever it is. I think or you could really struggle with talking to people and getting your point across, whatever it is. I think if you're open about it and you tell people as early as you can, look, this is something I really struggle with. Can you help me? Or how can I get better at this? If you tell your manager or whoever it is that this is something you actually really struggle with, because if you don't, then you're going to end up. Well, I will, and I certainly would sometimes if I didn't do it, I'd end up stressing myself out, or you're going to end up making mistakes, and that sometimes makes things worse. I think also another important thing is so the first thing would be kind of to know what you struggle with and to be upfront about it, but also don't compare yourself to other people who you're working with. It's very important that you don't go, oh, I should be able to do this because such and such can. And it could even be someone with a similar disability. You might think, oh, this person can do this, so why do I struggle with it so much? And that just end well. So just be you and do what you can do, and be open if you're struggling with something, whatever it might be, and just do the best that you can. I think that's really all that we can do. I know it's a whopping big cliche, but I think it's really the best advice I could give.
And very good advice too, Tess. Now, that's the end of our pre-prepared questions. We do have a few minutes left, so we're going to do some audience questions. Our first question is for you, Tess. Tess, you made an interesting point about anxiety being more disabling than your blindness. Do you find that people are more accommodating to you being blind or of your anxiety?
Well, I think the blindness is more visible. I mean, I suppose because, either if I'm working, in a building, everyone sees the girl with the white cane, or if I'm working in a Zoom meeting, everyone sees that my screen reader makes a lot of noise. And so they go that people tend to, or it's mentioned, or, it's quite an easy thing to say. Like I will always tell people that are interviewing me, for a job that I'm blind, and, this could be, I'll just need the screen reader. And so it's very visible, and B, it's something that I find easy to be upfront with because it's so self-evident. My eyes simply don't work, and that's that. The anxiety is a lot less visible, and I think when it's something like this, one of the more mentally debilitating mental health conditions, I think often, you can get into a stage of thinking that it's self-inflicted, or it's because you're not doing something right. So I think, to be honest, I haven't in my previous work experiences given many people much of an opportunity to be accommodating of my anxiety, because I haven't said anything for the most part. I feel like most people would these days. There's less of a stigma around anxiety. But yeah, I mean, it is easier to be the woman who is blind than the woman who is anxious. And that's no reflection on anyone. I think it's probably a reflection on myself. And it's visible. People are, I think, can help me with it so more possibly because it's visible. It's not something that I have to worry about having a conversation about. But yeah, I mean, I think people have been fairly accommodating. I mean, certainly at Intopia, everyone's been very accommodating about both. But yeah, it's hard for people to be accommodating about something if you don't tell them. And in some ways, that can be why it's more debilitating, because if people don't know, then, of course, we're all going to assume that everyone's fine and but if someone is in a spiral of anxiety and they're panicking and they think that they're terrible at everything and they can't function, then and we don't tell anyone, then no one has the chance to be accommodating. Sorry, does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. And I fully understand. Myself having ADHD, it's again something that's not visible, and it's easy to sort of get that bit of a fraud complex of it's just me not being able to do something rather than an actual disability or disorder.
Yeah, it's because it's, in your mind, it's because I'm bad at this. Yeah. I'm doing a bad job. It's not because I don't, it's not because there's actually something, I have an anxiety disorder. It's because I am doing something wrong here. This is, and that's why it's harder for people to be accommodating. Sorry, Charlie.
Yep, no, 100% agree. Now we have another question from Marcus. And Marcus, I do apologize. I am not able to pronounce the land on which you live and work, and please feel free to turn on your microphone and so that we can hear that. But curious from Australian perspective, what are the accessibility, maturity levels and understanding of disability needs like in Australia in comparison with the rest of the world? How are they different or the same? Adam, do you want to maybe go with that one?
Sure. Interesting question, that one, I think. So thank you. I think the maturity level in, speaking to Australia first, I think in the, particularly in the last sort of 5-6 years, the maturity level in terms of understanding of accessibility has definitely increased. And particularly, I'd say even in the last 18 months, I think one of the potentially positive, and I can't believe I just said that, but potentially positive byproducts of being in a global pandemic, and the fact that everything's moved online pretty much by force, and everyone's working from home, and technology is part of our daily lives now, whether we like it or not, means that people, organizations, everybody and everything is pretty much aware of the the issues that you can have from an access to technology perspective, including access to the internet and things like that as well. I mean, how many times have we been on video conference and all of a sudden someone's dropped off, or we're gone, or whatever it might be, because the internet connection's dropped out as well. And so I think understanding of accessibility is definitely increased and definitely matured in the Australian market. I'm not sort of as sure about overseas, particularly because I haven't been overseas for a while, and the last time I was on a plane, I could talk about some sort of maturity of access overseas. It'd be my I guess relating to myself and the physical accessibility space in the countries I were in weren't great at the time. That probably hasn't changed. In terms of the digital accessibility side of things, I think there's definitely been some improvement, but there is going to be a lot of improvement still to come, I think. Anyone else? Neil, do you want to?
Yeah, I would. Again, I'd echo that. In a previous life, I did a lot of international travel, visiting countries where awareness of disability and awareness of accessibility were not as good as what we've grown used to, and there were very good reasons for that, economic and social reasons. It's not a comparison table, but there's no question that countries like Australia and New Zealand are having a conversation that other countries would love to be having right now. Are we there? Most certainly not. But the fact that we can even have this webinar today, and the fact that we can even have an organization like Intopia that specializes in working with organizations that are not disability or accessibility confident, but which look to organizations like us to help them to become that way, is, I think, a testament to how far we have come in countries like Australia and New Zealand. But like I say, there's a long way still to go, because every one of us, I'm sure, can point to examples, probably just in the last week, that we've experienced where accessibility has not been what it should have been. So yeah, we're way down the road compared to some others, but we have ways to go. But all you can do is work with what you've got.
Agreed. And we'll take one more question. We're sort of really up to time now. One from Mitchell in the chat, saying, "Hey all, loving the discussion. I'd love to know how you walk the line between being an advocate for promoting disability versus being paraded for the benefit of others. How do you suss that out and negotiate those opportunities?" I'll start by answering that one. As a person with ADHD, I will put my face in front of a camera anytime, unless it's a pre-recorded thing, and talk about it. And I'm very lucky in that it is a hot topic at the moment. But how about everybody else on the panel?
Who wants to go? I can jump in. I think
Adam?
I think it's an interesting one, right? Because I'm not one for being paraded or promoted or anything like that at all. Anybody who knows me knows I hate public speaking. So the fact that I'm sitting here doing this this webinar is an achievement in itself, if you ask me. But I think we've kind of got to be practical here, right? I think when we're advocating for accessibility, you can't be advocating for a binary state of accessible or not accessible, right? Because there's a spectrum of accessibility, and you know, it's significant. So I think the way I look at things, any improvement on yesterday is good. Therefore, when we're talking to clients, or when I'm talking to clients, I'm talking to clients about what they can actually do to make an improvement, not necessarily talking to them about making things sort of accessible overnight, right? Because it's going to take time. It's not, you can't just flick a switch and go from completely inaccessible to completely accessible. So, and I don't even know if there's a definition of completely accessible that we would all agree on, whether it's all of us on this call or all of us in the accessibility community. So I think there's a fine balance, and in terms of sort of how we advocate for it, I'm one for small incremental improvements, and as much as you can when you can, I guess, but also planning out that whole journey, so you don't just go, I can only do a little bit, so I'll do that and then I'll stop. Right? Yeah. You do as much as you can, and then you keep going, because by the time you get to the end of a product development life cycle, for example, if you've included accessibility in all phases, then it's going to be in a much better state than it would have been otherwise. I don't know if I've made sense or if I've just rambled, but Neil?
No, you've made sense. You're all right. I think that I would say I've been an advocate all my life, but I'm not a role model to anybody. Anybody who knows me will say I would be the worst role model for anybody. So I think that I'm quite comfortable about the fact that I think I play an advocacy role, but I don't just do that around disability and accessibility. I do it in all sorts of areas of life, I think. As for because sometimes we are told as disabled people, oh, you must remember, I can remember kids being told you're an ambassador for other blind people. Well, no, I'm not. I've never been that, and I think I wouldn't be a very good one if I was. So I think that I hope that when, for example, often people would say that to you because if you are offered help to cross a road when you don't need it for the millionth time that day, it's rather irksome. But you don't turn around and bite the heads off the person that's offered that help, but you try and thank them politely, and you move on with your day. You do that not because you're an ambassador. You do that because you're a decent human being who is responding to someone who wanted to be helpful. I don't think that's particularly difficult to do. So no, I don't see myself as someone who's paraded out. I know it can happen. I think I would resist that if anyone tried, but like I say, anyone who knows me wouldn't dream of trying it because I would be a bit of a disappointment to them. So I'll just stick to the advocacy, thanks. What about you, Tess?
I am ashamed to say I haven't been a massive advocate in my life. I think my blindness has always been a part of my identity, but I wouldn't say it's been a massive part. I think for the reason that I just think it's probably a tiny part of me. And while I'm happy to be interviewed about it for, I've done a couple of podcast interviews recently about, my experiences, and I'm happy because I think it's important that we tell our stories, but they're only our stories, our individual stories. They cannot represent anything. They cannot represent a group of people. They are only our stories. And we're all, anyone, no matter if we share the same disability, we're all going to have very different lives and very different experiences. And I've never really seen myself as an ambassador for blindness or for anything. I possibly probably identify more as a gay woman with anxiety who happens to be blind than a blind woman with, you know, et cetera, et cetera. It's not a big part of my identity, so I don't see myself as really representing it. But I'm happy to tell my story if it gives anyone who is blind and who might be struggling with certain things, if it gives them any kind of encouragement to go, oh, well, you know, you can do this. Like, this is, you know, you can overcome whatever challenge that they might need to overcome. So I'm happy to tell my story. And also, you know, I am happy. I always try to be polite to people who offer help, even if they grab me, which I don't like. Also, I try and promote the point that it's really uncomfortable and not a good thing to be grabbing people. It doesn't matter if you're well-meaning, but I do feel like I've had conversations with people who have said, oh, you're so nice when I offer help. When I offered help to someone else who was blind, they were really rude. And so I guess I try and do my bit and try and be nice in case someone needs help who's blind and they don't get offered it because the last blind person that person offered help to was rude. You know, so I don't see myself as an ambassador. I just basically see myself as me, and I'm doing the best that I can with my life, and that's really all you can do.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody, for their answers. Thank you, Tess. That was really insightful. Neil and Adam, thank you for sharing this panel with me. I'm going to wrap things up because we are slightly over time, but we've done pretty well since we're all pretty chatty. A recording of this webinar will be available on the Intopia YouTube channel after this event. Thank you again to my fellow panelists for sharing your insights. Thank you to our captioner, Michael, to our Auslan interpreters, Danielle and Kim. Thank you to everybody who attended and watched. Have a great day. Try and do something for International Day of People with Disability to mark the occasion. And I'll let everybody go and enjoy the rest of their day. Thank you so much. And we will be doing another webinar in January, and that will be on, Sarah, I'm going to call you out of the viewing panel to pop in the chat. The next webinar will be hosted by Sarah and Andrew, and it will be on, Sarah, take it away, because I've forgotten. WCAG 2.2. Sorry, my apologies, Sarah. So WCAG 2.2 presented by Sarah and Andrew from Intopia, and that will be coming in the new year. We also have lots of other exciting stuff coming up, so keep an eye out on all channels.
And just really quickly jumping in here to thank Charlie for the facilitation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It was nothing.
Nicely done.
Thanks, guys. Thank you, everybody.
Find us at www.intopia.digital.